Some places hold a darkness that never fades. Time may pass, dust may settle, and walls may crumble, but something remains, watching, waiting. They may look abandoned, forgotten, just empty structures left to rot. But those who dare to step inside know the truth. The silence is too heavy, the air too thick. And when night falls, those who enter realize they are not alone. Tonight, I'll take you through terrifying stories that happened in a place most would never dare to step into. A place where whispers crawl through the walls, where unseen hands move objects in the dark, where doors refuse to stay shut, no matter how many times they're locked. These stories aren't myths. They aren't urban legends passed down through generations. These are real encounters, chilling experiences from those who stepped too far into the unknown and came back with something they couldn't explain. As you listen, I want you to imagine yourself there, walking through those forgotten halls, feeling the presence of something just beyond sight. Would you make it out? Or would you become part of the story? Stay with me until the very end, because the final story is the most disturbing of all. It will make you think twice before ever stepping foot in. History 1. A group of urban explorers had heard about the abandoned orphanage for years. Stories of strange noises, moving shadows, and doors that locked on their own made it an irresistible challenge. They weren't the type to believe in ghosts, but they loved the thrill of exploring forgotten places. That night, armed with flashlights and cameras, they made their way through the overgrown path that led to the crumbling building. The orphanage stood in eerie silence, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti and vines. The air inside was thick, carrying the scent of dust and decay. The moment they stepped through the broken doorway, an unsettling feeling washed over them. The silence was almost unnatural, like the building itself was listening. They moved carefully through the dark hallways, past empty dormitories with rusted bed frames and rotting mattresses. Their flashlights illuminated peeling wallpaper, broken toys left behind, and old furniture covered in thick layers of dust. Everything was exactly how they expected, until they reached a small room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, the hinges rusted but intact. Inside, the room looked different from the others. It was small, with only a wooden chair in the center and a few scattered toys on the floor. The air felt heavier here, charged with something they couldn't explain. One of them stepped inside cautiously, brushing away cobwebs as he moved toward the chair. Then, the door slammed shut behind them. The group jumped, their flashlights flickering. They ran to the door, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard they pulled or pushed, it stayed locked. One of them checked the handle, twisting it desperately, but something held it in place from the other side. A sudden sound echoed through the room. It was faint at first, like soft rustling, but it grew louder. It was coming from the toys. The scattered stuffed animals and dolls, long abandoned, shifted slightly, as if something unseen had brushed against them. One of the dolls, sitting in the corner, slowly tipped over onto its side. Then they heard it, a whisper. It was quiet, almost unintelligible, like a child's voice carried by the wind. None of them could make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was pleading. Panic set in. One of them banged on the door, yelling for help, but their voices seemed swallowed by the thick air. Another tried kicking it down, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering continued, growing more insistent. Then, the temperature dropped. The cold was sudden, unnatural. Their breath became visible in the dim light. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, as if something was standing just out of sight, surrounding them. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, reaching toward them. One of them, in desperation, yanked at the door handle one last time, and then it gave way. The door burst open, sending them tumbling into the hallway. They didn't stop to question what had happened. They ran, racing toward the exit, their pounding footsteps the only sound in the empty orphanage. Once outside, they gasped for air, their hands shaking. When they turned back to look at the hallway they had just escaped from, the small room's door was wide open, but they all remembered it being shut just moments ago. Without another word, they left, abandoning their plans to explore further. They never spoke about what happened in detail, never tried to rationalize it. But weeks later, when one of them reviewed the footage they had taken inside the room, they noticed something chilling. Just before the door slammed shut, the camera had captured something in the darkness, a faint, shadowy figure standing beside the chair. History of... The sun was already dipping below the treetops when Daniel realized he had taken the wrong path. As a seasoned forest ranger, he knew the woods better than most, but something about tonight felt different. The trail had been clear at first, yet the deeper he walked, the more unfamiliar it became. The trees seemed taller, denser, pressing in around him. His radio had lost signal miles back, and his phone was useless. He exhaled sharply, adjusting his backpack. "I'll just turn around and head back," he told himself. But when he looked behind him, the path was gone. Where there had been a narrow dirt trail, there was now only thick undergrowth and towering trees. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't veered off the path, had he? The air grew colder, unnaturally so. The rustling of leaves filled the silence, though there was no wind. That was when he heard it. A whisper. It was faint, like a voice carried through the trees, but it had no clear direction. Daniel spun around, shining his flashlight into the woods. Nothing, but the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, overlapping with itself, as if multiple voices were murmuring at once. His breath quickened. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the thick canopy above. No answer, only more whispering, circling him like unseen figures hidden among the trees. He forced himself to move. He needed to find his way back, and fast. His boots crunched against the forest floor, but every step he took, the voices seemed to shift. It was as if the forest itself was rearranging around him, leading him deeper instead of out. Then, something moved in his periphery, a shadow between the trees, slipping behind the trunks before he could focus on it. He froze. "Who's there?" No answer, just a whispering, now clearer. It wasn't the wind. The words were almost discernible, not in a language he knew, but rhythmic, like a chant. His pulse pounded in his ears. He broke into a run. The path had to be somewhere. He just needed to find an opening, a clearing, anything to orient himself. But the deeper he went, the darker it became. The sky, which should have still held traces of light, was now an inky void above him. Then he saw something ahead, a figure standing motionless in the middle of the trail. His flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, the light illuminated it, a person or something shaped like one. His body went cold. It had no face, just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a mouth, and a nose should have been. His body went cold. It had no face, just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a mouth, and a nose should have been. The whispering turned to a crescendo. Daniel stumbled backward. But before he could turn, the flashlight died completely. The darkness swallowed him whole. The next morning, search teams found him sitting at the edge of the forest, staring blankly ahead. He couldn't explain how he got there, but his boots were covered in mud from a part of the forest that didn't exist on any map. Story 3. The storm came out of nowhere. The sky had been clear just moments ago, but within minutes, heavy rain pounded against the windshield, and the winding road became nearly impossible to see. James gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he struggled to keep the car from skidding. Then, without warning, the engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered, and the car rolled to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. Cursing under his breath, James reached for his phone. No signal, just his luck. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the freezing rain, shielding his face as he looked around. That's when he saw it. A house, barely visible through the mist and trees, standing alone on the side of the road. With no other options, he ran toward it. The front porch creaked under his weight as he knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle. It turned easily. Inside, the house was eerily silent. The furniture was old but intact, the air thick with dust, and something else, something stale. A single lamp flickered in the hallway, casting long shadows against the faded wallpaper. "Hello," James called, but his voice felt swallowed by the stillness. Thunder rumbled outside. He moved deeper into the house, searching for a phone, a landline, anything. But as he passed through the first door, he froze. The hallway before him looked familiar. Too familiar. He turned back, but the door he had just walked through was gone. Panic settled in his chest. He moved forward, trying another door. The same hallway stretched before him again. The same flickering lamp. The same peeling wallpaper. James's breathing quickened. He ran now, pushing through doors, turning corners, but no matter which direction he went, the hallway never changed. It was endless, looping in on itself. His footsteps echoed in a place that should not have been this big. Then, the lights flickered again, and the shadows moved. A whisper drifted through the stale air. It was faint, almost like a breath against his ear. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. His pulse pounded. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. A door creaked behind him. He turned just in time to see it slowly swing open at the end of the hall. Beyond it was darkness. James hesitated, but he had no choice. He stepped through. The room was empty, except for a single chair in the center, and something was sitting in it. His flashlight flickered, barely illuminating the figure. It was him, sitting unmoving, staring straight ahead. James stumbled backward, his mind racing. The whispers grew louder. The house wasn't letting him leave. The next morning, a passing car found his abandoned vehicle on the side of the road. The house, however, was never found. Just an empty lot where it should have stood. Some places should never be entered. But curiosity and fear often push us beyond the limit. The empty roads, the silent forests, the forgotten houses. They all seem harmless at first. But as you've seen tonight, not everything abandoned is truly empty. Shadows move when no one is looking. Doors refuse to stay shut. Time bends in ways it shouldn't. These stories remind us that some places don't just hold memories. They hold something else. Something waiting, watching. Have you ever been somewhere that just felt wrong? A place where the air was too still, the silence too heavy, and every instinct told you to leave? Maybe you weren't imagining it. Maybe, for a brief moment, you stepped into a place that wasn't meant to be disturbed. If these stories gave you chills, subscribe and share them with someone who loves a good scare. Who knows? Maybe they have a story of their own. And remember, some places are abandoned for a reason. Stay safe and be careful where you step, because once you enter, you might not be the only one there.